A new neighbor provides Caroline with unanticipated assistance. Caroline, raising 3 children, is coping with grief after losing her husband. Her youngest son, Jason, finds it difficult to cope with grief and begins to skip school, alienating himself from the family. The older children are also suffering, hiding their emotions under a mask of indifference. As Caroline struggles to keep her family together, she finds unexpected support in the form of a new neighbor, David, who helps her cope and start a new chapter in her life. The sun was shining brightly, but I could barely see it through the shroud of grief. Ever since my husband Michael had passed away, it was as if the world had lost its colors. Everything around me was gray, lifeless, devoid of warmth and light. Every morning began with a heavy feeling of emptiness that stayed with me all day. I tried to hold on for the sake of the children, but it was getting harder every day. I sat in the kitchen with my hands around a mug of hot coffee, hoping that at least its warmth would penetrate me and warm my soul. But nothing was working. There was an emptiness inside that seemed endless. The hot drink burned my fingers, but it couldn't melt the ice that bound my heart. Time stretched slowly, the minutes seemed like an eternity, and the silence of the house was pressing on my ears. I stared out the window, watching people pass by, living their lives, unaware of the pain that was tearing me up inside. Why did this happen to us? Why him? Why was I alone? He was such a strong, upbeat man. His smile always lit up the house, even on the darkest days. And now? Now it's just the 4 of us, me, 2 teenagers and little Jason, only 10 years old. Jason. He's been a different kid lately. Instead of his usual cheerfulness and laughter, I saw only tears and sullen silence. He started skipping school, hiding in his room, avoiding talking to us. It was painful to watch, because he used to be the most open and friendly boy. His laughter used to fill the house with joy, but now I only heard rare sounds, reminiscent of echoes of past happiness. Why? I thought. Why is life so cruel? Why should our family be the one to go through such a trial? The questions swirled around in my head, giving me no peace. But thinking about why it happened didn't bring relief. We had to move on with our lives, take care of our children, and cope with everyday life. However, every day became a struggle. The children suffered too, each in their own way. The older ones tried to hide their grief under a mask of indifference, but I knew that inside them a storm of emotions was boiling. They were young, their hearts had not yet known real pain, and now they had to face a loss that had turned their world upside down. They had yet to find their way in this world, to realize who they were and where they were going, and here was such a loss. How would they be able to cope? These were the questions on my mind, and I was afraid I wouldn't be enough support for them. That night, when I had almost given up hope, I got a call from my sister Julie. She lived in another state, but always kept in touch. We talked for hours, discussing our problems, sharing our joys and sorrows. But now the conversation was heavy. "Caroline, you have to pull yourself together," she said sternly, but lovingly. "You are a strong woman, and you can cope." Her words sounded like a sentence. I wanted to believe her, but inside there was only fatigue and despair. "That's easy to say, Julie," I replied quietly. "I'm trying, I really am. But children. They're so different, and they're each going through their own pain. I don't know how to help them." Julie sighed. "I know, honey. But you're not alone. Remember that I'm always here for you, ready to help. Maybe you should try talking to someone else. A psychologist can help you all sort out your feelings." A psychologist. The thought terrified me. Admitting that we needed outside help seemed weak. But maybe Julie's right. Maybe it's the only way out. The next day I decided to see a psychologist. After talking to Julie, I realized that I could no longer struggle alone. The kids and I went to the specialist, and for the first time in a long time, I felt relieved. Someone else saw our pain, understood it, and was willing to help. This feeling of support, albeit temporary, gave me a little respite, allowed me to breathe and look at what was happening from a different perspective. At home, however, the situation continued to deteriorate. Jason kept skipping classes, the older kids were fighting with each other, and I just couldn't get along with any of them. Every day was a struggle for survival, and I began to feel like I was losing control of the situation. Mornings started with another conflict, lunch was spent in tense silence, and evenings ended in tears and closed doors. A home that was once full of love and laughter now resembled a battlefield where everyone defended their wounds without seeing anyone else's. What to do? How do I get my family back? These questions kept me on my toes. They swirled around in my head, preventing me from focusing on anything else, and grew louder and more insistent each day. One evening, as I stood at the window looking out at the street, I noticed a new neighbor. He had moved in a few weeks ago, but we hadn't had a chance to get to know each other until now. The man made a pleasant impression, and in his gaze I caught something familiar, the same sadness that lived in me. His face was serious, but it didn't have the heaviness I'd felt in myself. He walked confidently, as if he knew where he was going, and that surprised me. Maybe he has something going on too? I thought. But then why did he seem so calm and confident? This contrast made me wonder. Perhaps he had found a way to cope with the pain that was beyond my reach. Or maybe his story was different from mine, and he was able to find comfort where I only saw emptiness. A few days passed, and one morning as I was walking to the car to take the kids to school, a new neighbor approached me. He moved calmly, with confidence, but there was not a shadow of arrogance in his gaze. As he came closer, he tilted his head slightly and smiled welcomingly. "Good morning, Mrs." He hesitated a little, not knowing my name. "Cooper," I finished for him. "Caroline Cooper." He nodded, continuing to look at me with warmth and respect. "It's a pleasure, Caroline. I noticed you live close by. I just wanted to introduce myself and see if you needed any help." His offer caught me off guard. Suddenly a wave of distrust and fear came over me. Who is this man? Why does he want to help? After all, strangers rarely offer their help without a reason. But then I remembered that he looked at me with such warmth and sympathy that it was impossible not to believe in the sincerity of his intentions. His gaze was direct, honest, and there wasn't an ounce of falsity in it. "Thank you, David," I said, trying to stay calm. "It's okay, we're doing fine." He smiled, and there was so much understanding and warmth in that smile that I almost shuddered. His voice was soft, but firm. "If you ever need help, I'm always here for you. You know where to find me." Having said that, he walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. It was the first time in a long time that someone had offered real help, and it made me wonder. Maybe I really was too closed off in my grief. Maybe by refusing support, I was creating barriers that were keeping me and my children from moving forward? These thoughts kept me on my toes, and I began to realize that maybe it was time to reevaluate how I viewed the world around me. As the weeks went by, I found myself seeing David more and more often. He would help me carry shopping bags or run errands, sometimes inviting me in for a cup of coffee. At first I resisted, not wanting to let someone new into my life, but his support was so necessary that I gradually began to change. His presence in my life became something familiar, almost natural. He never imposed, but was always there when I needed him. Meanwhile, the situation with the kids continued to deteriorate. Jason got in trouble at school, and the principal called me in for a talk. I felt completely helpless. How do I explain to a child that his behavior is wrong when I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing? Every conversation with him ended in tears and mutual accusations, and I didn't know how to stop this cycle of negativity. The older children continued to fight, and the house became an arena of constant conflict. Sometimes I felt like I was losing control not only of the situation, but also of myself. When I came out of school after talking to the principal, I saw David standing by the car. He looked at me with understanding and asked, "What happened, Caroline?" I told him everything that had happened, and suddenly I was crying. David put his arm around me and said soothingly, "I understand how hard this is for you. Why don't I help you take Jason home?" At first I refused, but then I realized there was no other way. Sighing, I agreed, and we headed off to school together. David remained calm and collected on the way, which gave me confidence. When we entered the principal's office, I felt his presence supporting me. He spoke convincingly and sincerely, helping me to express my thoughts and reassure the principal that we would do everything we could to make things right. The principal listened attentively and seemed to believe in our intentions. On the way home, I looked at David and thought about how much my life had changed in the past few months. Everything seemed to be crumbling around me, but thanks to this man's support, I was beginning to find the strength to move forward. His confidence was transmitted to me, and I began to believe that maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. Maybe there was a good future ahead of us, full of new opportunities. As time went on, I began to notice changes in myself and in my relationship with my children. Thanks to David's help and our combined efforts, Jason started attending school regularly, and the older kids started fighting less. Of course, not everything was perfect, but we began to find common ground. Our conversations became longer and deeper, and we began to share our worries and fears instead of keeping them to ourselves. The house gradually filled with a warmth and comfort that was sorely lacking. David became a part of our family. He came over for dinners, helped cook, told interesting stories and funny anecdotes, making the children laugh. He played board games with them, taught them new things, shared his knowledge and experience. Gradually I began to realize that he was not just a neighbor, but a true friend, ready to support in any situation. His presence became an integral part of our everyday life, and I could no longer imagine how we lived without him. One evening, as we sat on the porch enjoying the warm summer air, David took my hand and looked me straight in the eye. His voice was quiet, but full of feeling. "Caroline, I want you to know. I've experienced loss, too, and I understand how it feels. But together, we can get through anything." Those words touched me to the core. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. That there was someone who understood me and was ready to share my worries. In his eyes, I saw a reflection of my own pain, but also the strength that had helped him through the hard times. I felt his hand gripping mine tightly, and that touch filled me with warmth and confidence. At that moment, I realized that I had found not just a friend, but a man who was ready to stand beside me at any moment, to share joy and sorrow, to support me in the most difficult situations. We looked into each other's eyes for a long time, and I realized that I was ready to open my heart anew. In his gaze, I saw a reflection of my own feelings, a mixture of anxiety and hope, fear and determination. But most importantly, I felt that he believed in me, believed in our ability to overcome any difficulty. In that moment, I realized that life really does go on, and despite all the challenges, there are new opportunities and joys ahead of us. So ended this chapter of my life, full of pain and loss, but also filled with hope and new beginnings. I knew there would be many challenges ahead, but now I had the feeling that I was not alone. I had someone beside me, ready to support and help, and that gave me strength and confidence. New pages were ahead of us, which we would write together, and I believed that they would be bright and happy.